Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Hesse Vlog with yours truly, Mr. Stephen Hesse. Thank you so much for checking out the YouTube Geek Apocalypse channel. I really do appreciate it. And yes, it is I, Stephen Hesse. That would be weird, wouldn't it, if I had a Hesse vlog and then actually it was like, no, I don't actually even have a name Hesse whatsoever. That would be weird, and also that would seem to imply I've been kidnapped. New beard. Could happen. Thank you so much for everyone who's checked out the Southpaw rant that I did before this. Basically, what I was trying to do in that rant was to basically find out what their inspiration was behind Billy Hope and actually which boxer in real life they were referring to with this 43-0 undefeated streak. And what I would establish in that rant was I still didn't seem to work out who, in fact, they got their inspiration from. But anyway, speaking of inspiration, one of the things that I wanted to do within this vlog is to talk about how I lost my religion. Nice segue. And I have an itchy nose. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how that came about through the process of being brought up as a religious person, and to now where I regard myself as somewhat of a sort of reluctant agnostic. I don't know what the right phrase is, but we can discuss that as we go on. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the inspiration behind me wanting to do this in the first place. Not just to talk about my story, but the reason behind it. Because Mormons seem to be entering my life in an alarming rate. And I didn't think I'd ever say that in my life, but there you go, I've just said it. A group of Mormons who were knocking on doors. Apparently they were lost. And is they were trying to convert people to Mormonism, and they bumped into me while I was carrying my shopping back to my flat. And my friends joked. I joked with my friends as I was talking about this, because one of the things that they didn't realize was they were talking to someone that's incredibly well read on the subject. Because as I just touched on, I was brought up a Christian, and because of that, I have read a great deal about religious texts, and I've read the Bible several times, and then moved on to other religious books. And so they wanted to talk to me about Mormonism. So then fast forward to a few days ago, and my phone goes off, and it's another person from the Mormon Society. I suddenly felt like for some reason that I was actually like dealing with the news of the world, and the sort of I don't remember me telling them my phone number, but I could have been hypnotized into going, and then my number is this amount. This amount, they bribed me without even knowing. That was really silly of them, that they hypnotized me and then gave me money afterwards. They're very strange. They're very strange hypnotic people. But so I answered it. So one of the things I thought I would do to kind of amuse people watching this stream, I hope, is to kind of tell people what I've been telling my friends about when I answered it, and basically what happened in regards to me answering the phone and talking to these Mormons and debating with them about their Mormonism. So this was roughly how the phone call happened. Oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. Is that my phone going off? Okay, who could this be? Hello? Oh yes, it is I, the great Lord Stephen Hesse, yes. Yes, your prayers have been answered. Good job, good to see you been praying. It's paid off. What can the Great One do for you? Oh, okay. Wow, it's tough. You've went straight in with a tough question there. You're asking me, do I know anything about Mormonism? Do you mean the religion that was started in the 19th century, that was actually written in 16th century English, which kind of proves it was a known charlatan? And the fact that he was actually a known fraudster who actually got convicted means that this Mormon faith is actually, anyone that follows it is an actual idiot. And also to the fact that it is such a modern religion that Mitt Romney, who was the last presidential candidate, he actually was a Mormon, even though if you look at his research as to what religious people that he actually believed in, is that before that he was actually two other religions before that, being a Lutheran and a Christian. So therefore that he even picked it third in advance, which kind of tells you how crap this religion actually is. Also, one of the things that I find very but what so in a lot of sense, it's not really, even though it's been involved in a magnitude of different things and talked about a lot of the time, it really is a fake religion and not should be put on the same standard as any others. Is that the religion you're on about? But yeah, this is the point where I'm going to get all serious about it because yeah, so I mean no, well, I guess I do mean a little bit of disrespect in terms of the it is based on a charlatan. He was a known fraudster of his time, and as I say, he wrote in 16th century English, and decided that that God spoke to him and made the church and based on the Book of Mormon, and decided that that had just as importance as the Bible because they're often regarded as a section of Christianity because they have the same sort of beliefs, but they believe that we are all, going to be touched by God in some way, and that is very, very destructive. I will say at this point, as I say, I don't mean any disrespect in saying I want to be clear on my views here. Spirituality is good, as in if you believe in a God and in a sense you believe it behind the scenes. I'm not even that bothered personally if you say it up front because I know people in my life who are friends that do. But that's sort of how I regard spirituality, is believing in something that's harmless. What becomes harmful is when you think you have an interventional God, someone that decides what you do, and that always ends up in certain different parts of categories. So, for example, one of the things that they decide to do is to say that originally, when God created the Big Bang, is that he was the one that did that, and then he gave us free will. So he destroyed the universe and created this point now. So he decided to do that, and then he gave us free will, as if, so all the stuff in between of Noah's Ark and various other things and everything else. So they add all the scientific viewpoint and saying that yeah, but God did that, and then he gave us free will, as if he's sort of cleansing himself of his responsibilities or her responsibilities. Which I just find, that's ever so convenient, because if you want to talk about free will in the very sense of what seems obvious to me, is that free will is we have free will whether we want to or not. That's what free will is. Therefore, the idea of us not having responsibility for the choices that we make, like for example, the fact that I had a choice whether or not to do this vlog and I chose to do it. I didn't have some sort of higher power saying to me other to do it, because the person inside my head is me, which leads to all sorts of issues about mental health and some claim, like I do with my bipolar disorder, that you hear another person in your voice, but I've never, which I always find interesting about this subject, is I've never said that other voice is another higher being telling me to do certain things. It is an aspect of my brain and an aspect of me. It's not one that I regard, but it's a broken version of me, as in that's why it is called an illness. I think it is in a sense not understanding the complete complexity of the human brain, and that there's so many different aspects of it, that you can have a chemical imbalance where you can have a certain part of your brain that doesn't work. You can be very high in creativity, for example, and be not so great in a practical sense, which I think hits me down to a T. And I have an itchy nose. As I'm saying, if you have a God that are telling you what to do, like for example, you wouldn't be adhering to a God who decided to say to you that you should murder and kill people. And one of the things that they do to combat that, in terms of religious people who do believe in this interventional God, is that they always play the card of that they say that Hitler and Stalin were atheists, not realizing that that is flawed logic in saying that, in that yeah, they may have been atheists, but that's not the reason that they decided to do all the horrible deeds. That you very rarely see someone who goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out and kill people in the name of atheism. I mean, I regard myself as an atheist in the sense of I don't believe God exists, but it doesn't mean I'm going to go out and say I'm going to kill people, because I'm very upset by the fact that people do believe in God. I think that they're wrong, but I wouldn't go to the lengths of punishing someone like the God that they claim to follow is prepared to do by this interventional God. The same God that would give them all the luxuries of life and yet give a 5-year-old leukemia. It just seems to give that person a self-importance, not realizing the randomness of how we've been here. Which is why, like I say, the one example I've gave is that so we originally started with no free will, and then God gave for it, or we've always had free will, and that's the way God wanted it to be. Or we've not had we've not got free will, and we're all manipulated by him. Which that last point scares me greatly, because this idea of that I don't have a choice, and it's all predisposed by some sort of higher being makes I don't think there's no suggestion that it would be that way. So the fact that it's like that is the fact that they're willing to say that has no credence for me. If people believe in that form of spirituality, like I just said, where it's harmless in terms of that they believe in our God, even then that can be debated in the sense of which God are they deciding to believe in, because it always seems that people pick and choose what religion they want to do. There's people I know, and there's plenty of examples of this, that won't be religious on the grounds of that pets won't make it into heaven, or that they may have a gay friend who they believe should be allowed in heaven, and then they read the scripture of whatever religion they choose and realize that homosexuals are not allowed in heaven, and therefore decide that, well, I can't give up on my friend. There's various examples of that. So you suddenly find people feeling that they need to shop around for religion, which isn't a faith, it seems like a fear, and wanting to have something to support their life in some way behind the scenes. The one thing that I think makes a lot of sense to me, which was the thing I most struggle with in terms of not believing in a religion, is this fear of dying. But I always clarify that by saying it's not actually the fear of the actual act of dying, because I think it gives life a certain relevance and importance by that existing, but also I am actually fearful of not living. So it's this idea that I haven't lived my life to the fullest, but it gives life an incredible beauty and importance by doing that. Because even if you do believe in that there's an afterlife and there's something great coming your way, surely it would make a lot more sense to believe in that this is the one life we do get on this planet, and try and do the best you can anyway. Because the thing that frightens me is that there's certain people you meet who are religious in that sense, like the guys I met on the phone and on the street, is who believe pathologically that they are right and refuse to be and are going to end up in a much better place, because Mormonisms in particular feel that they're being judged by God to enter some form of resurrection that's going to happen to them, obviously in another plateau of life. By doing that, they spend their entire time preaching that other people should do the same thing. Like their entire happiness in regards to their faith is how many people they convert during their lifetime, which doesn't seem to me to be a very strong faith if their happiness is embedded in other people being part of that culture. And the thing is that when that first started, when Joseph Smith first started the Book of Mormon, which, as I say, is a fake, clearly a charlatan documentation, is his first job was to send, his first duty that he wanted people to do was to send missionaries out to convert people radically to his religion, to make it an official religion. So that to me seems not something of someone who wants to just preach openly. I mean, Jesus gets a lot of stick, but it seems to me that he had an element, at least he had an element of a passive way of his teachings. It just seems to me that that's very forced in that sense. And I was making in regards to atheism is, I don't go around with my life waking up and thinking about my atheism. Yeah, I touch on it and I debate on it because it's a very important subject, even though I kind of think that it shouldn't be as much as it is now. You would think, being over 2,000 years since some of these books have been written, but it still is. But so I find it interesting in that aspect, and it's a good thinker. But in terms of that the impact it has on my life, it's very minimal. And as I was touching on earlier, and a very serious point is, You know, as much as they go out and want to convert people to their religion by knocking on doors and leaflets and various other things, I have just as much energy not wanting to do that in promoting my atheism. And this isn't what this video is about. It is about showcasing all of the information and telling you how I decided to reach that conclusion. Because when I touched on this idea of that seeing people pick and choose what religion to pick based on their already prearranged settings, Mormonism, as I touched on in the phone call, that's something they did. Is that, you know, it surely if you have a religion, it would be something that you sort of preach on its teachings and don't decide to change it. But yet there's so many stuff that's been changed within Mormonism. As I say, polygamy was one of the big things that happen in Mormonism, and they get annoyed by the fact that it's still sort of treated with that, even though if it started like that would never happen in any other form of religion. You wouldn't see, you know, it's one of the things is always amusing about when they argue about the amendments in America, not realizing what the word amendment means. It means that they didn't get it right the first time and they decided to change it. You know, but that doesn't happen in religion. Part of the reason that people get so upset about and get critical over people having a critical viewpoint of religion is that they get so, you know, animated and attack people with that attitude because they don't want it to change. But you wouldn't see sort of Christians taking the sort of critical views of people like me who say, for example, that, you know, they don't say that slavery was a problem because at the time it was rampant and acceptable. They wouldn't suddenly go, oh, quick, Stephen's got a point there. We're gonna have to just say that slavery was wrong. No, they just say, well, you know, that's it's God's way, which I always seem to think is a convenient way of looking at things, that God moves around in mysterious circles, which you know, I just think he needs to get off the escalator. One of the things that I find interesting is, as I say, so black people, for example, with it being such a modernized religion, that Mormonism wouldn't allow black people to be part of the religion, and so they changed it, and so they decided to change that as well as the polygamy, and also, as I touched on, this idea of that they would allow homosexual people in, openly homosexual people, to be Mormons, as long as they don't practice the act of homosexuality. As I say, it's just exactly the same as saying to a dog that, excuse me, but can you not bark? Even because sexuality is something you're born with, and it is something that isn't a choice. And the very definition of being homosexual is that you have a relation with someone of the same gender. So by stopping that, you're actually stopping them being the very thing that you're claiming they are, and accepting. You're not accepting it at all. You're actually stopping it, which I just find incredibly, you know, unintelligent, really. As I keep touching on, if you just believe in a God, that's great, and if it helps you in some way, then that's your call, and I'm not criticizing that at all. But one of the things that I find very destructive and harmful is this idea of that they think that Mormons think that God is speaking to them speaking to them as individuals, which is puzzling, because if you have a religion where it's all based on one doctrine by Jesus, which Mormons still is to some degree, and by the prophets who they decide are prophets, which is again very, very strange. You know, who decides what? That's kind of my point, is that, you know, if I am sitting here now and claim that God's speaking to me and he says we do this, and yet a person in another Mormon church says that God spoke to them and said to do the opposite, who decides who's got the more, which God's actually speaking to me? And that's the other side of the argument. Most religious people believe in a God, you know, whether it be, you know, Muhammad or you know, Muhammad or Jesus or whatever it may be, and yet they do not believe, or like a God as in just a generic spiritual God, but also, so yeah, there's like 2,700 gods that are in the known you know, lexicon of history, of written text that we know of. And so I don't believe in 2,700 of them. I don't believe in any God Yet they believe in one God, which makes them 99% towards me in terms of the 1% they of a God that they pick they believe in. So they're more believing in majority don't believe in a lot of gods, but just believe in one, which seems a strange way of deciding who to believe and what not to believe. And the thing that I find most disconcerting is when I was speaking to these Mormons and trying to get them to form some sort of debate, they kept answering the same thing of saying, well, there's nothing you can say that changed my belief. And when I ever brought up the fact that Joseph Smith, there's a lot of evidence to say that he was a known fraudster and a conman, and he got convicted. That for them to turn around and just say, well, I choose to not believe that I don't. There's no way to know for certain that happened, which it just to me seems so unbelievably hypocritical, because I could say exactly the same thing about their belief. And also the fact that they're so adamant that they're right, it means that they spend a great deal of time not messing about with logic, because as soon as it gets to a logical argument, they know they can't win. So they answer it with the same generic thing that you can't argue back by going, well, I choose not to believe that, which is you can't tell someone what they can and can't believe, whether you think it's wrong or not, which I always find hilarious, really, is because they almost feel like they've won in that regard when it's really approached as a cop-out, because to me it seems like that's certainty, not faith. They want to believe for certain, whereas there are people in the world who I know who are religious that it doesn't structure my way of appreciating them as human beings. One of the people I researched at university when I did civil rights stuff and American history was Cornel West, who I have a great deal of admiration for, and I do not care that he's a religious man, because he's an incredibly wise, intelligent person. And one of the things I ultimately respect him for on the religious topic is he's willing to read the other side of the argument. Like, he reads David Hume, the great Scottish, anti-religious theist, and he says a great deal of stuff in regards to, and he says that he has very clever and intellectual arguments. So the idea of it not making any sense on the other side is he disputes and says, no, I understand the other side of the coin. I still believe in what I still believe in I still am a Christian. I still believe in Christianity. I don't mind that, because he's willing to read all of the information, but having the view of just reading one book and deciding that is the framework for your entire life, I find incredible. I just view that as incredibly dangerous. Also, it doesn't mean as well, which I think is a very important point, is when someone says they're an agnostic, which I used to say, because I don't know for certain, but I am like 99.9% sure that there's a God, that a God doesn't exist, because there's no proof that there is, and until I get shown otherwise. That it doesn't mean when you say agnostic that there's this thing that people seem to think that it means that that's 50-50. As in, if you don't know, then it's 50-50 either way, or there could be a God, there couldn't be. No, that's why I made sure I said that, no, I think 99%, I'm 99% certain that there isn't a God, and 1% unsure, which makes me an agnostic, not an atheist. But this idea of being labelled an atheist, like it has some sort of relevance in my life, is completely irrelevant, because it doesn't. It has no relevance at all. I don't wake up and go, must do everything I can to plan being an atheist today. It has no bearing. So in terms of the story of how I lost my faith, which is the whole premise of this vlog, is to quickly talk about the fact that when I went to Sunday school, they talked about the Good Samaritan story. Now, the Good Samaritan story, I'm sure people know, so I don't need to go into it. But they kind of gave the more child version of it. They didn't sort of read it from scripture, so it was kind of just the child version of essentially doing a good deed regardless of the circumstances. And so they ended this particular lesson Sunday school lesson by saying, "So if you see a good deed such as that on your travels in life, know that God and Jesus, Jesus told him to do that." And I, as a 12-year-old, showed that I had some form of intellect and critical thinking. Like put my hand up and said and asked the question of, but if the person doing the good deed, like the Good Samaritan, is not religious, does that mean he wouldn't do it? And that one sentence got me thrown out of the lesson by, can you imagine that, by being thrown out of a classroom, or perceived as a classroom for asking a fundamental question. And that really led me to sort of question it even more, ironically. Maybe if they haven't have dealt with that in such a radical sense, then maybe it wouldn't have opened my mind to questioning it further, but which is an interesting thought. But this idea of religion has a monopoly on morality. If you think about one of the things that we go through in life, that's something that's forever changing. You change your views on how you deal with people, how you deal with stuff more through experience. And the problem is, like the Mormon faith, is that they believe in something that's archaic, or in this case, a fake document from it's only 200 years old. That's the book, and then they'll change it according to their narrow-minded view of the world. That they'll change it accordingly to fit a nice little box. Whereas if you are not that way inclined to follow a particular form of scripture, you'll find your own path and decide what morality is for you, and then follow that. But that's not set in stone, and that's ever evolving, and that kind of shows that you are an intellectual being by that you're questioning it every day, and going from it in that viewpoint. Because something that I would have dealt with 10 years ago, to now heading towards 30, is that I would have a completely different approach because of my life experiences. Whereas as a if you're that radical towards religion, your experience don't seem to matter, because you can just say that God has told you to do something, but you haven't learned from the experience. And this is why this idea of being the free will that we talked about earlier is, you got to sort of have some form of responsibility for your actions. And it seems that whenever somebody does something wrong and just say, "Oh, God moves in mysterious ways," as I say, he just needs to get someone to fix his escalator. It's quite a long. If you think about it, it's going to break down. It's quite long up there. But also this idea of it's up there, way up there. But if their idea is to think about it, is to think about things that we don't. A lot of the times, I think that the reason people think that is two things: is that they decide that they want to believe in a religion, and I think this is what my mom is like: is that they're afraid of dying, that they're just terrified of dying, that they want something more when they leave, and no one wants to leave their loved ones. No one wants to. Everyone would love the idea of seeing them again, and yeah, and this idea of spirituality, that there's something there, or that you can talk to people, and you don't give a shit. You might not give a shit that it might be that that it isn't real, but they're real inside here. So you could talk to someone who's no longer with you, and kind of talk to them anyway, and pretend that they're there, and that's perfectly reasonable. Is that their memories in a sense, and you're just reliving them in a sense, and creating an environment where you can relive them in the best way. So that's perfectly understandable. But the idea of that that we don't have a choice in the matter, and that it's all predestined, is something that I find incredibly it's this idea of that we don't understand our minds well enough, or the world well enough, but it doesn't mean that we don't try, which is why I'm such a huge fan of science, because we're a believer in science, because I'm not a believer in science. I'm a believer in truth, if anything. Whatever the truth is, whether it's something I don't want to hear or whatnot, the great thing about truth is it's unbreakable. The truth is what it claims to be. So the idea of it being difficult is one of the great things about life, and this idea that it devalues life by not meaning as much because of something, because of it, there's not something after, is missing the point, I think. Because waking up and seeing the sun and seeing your friends and interacting with people and doing something meaningful in your life means so much more by the fact that this is the one chance we get. So the idea of it, this is just the viewing apartment to a greater thing. Why don't you have the attitude of that, if it is the one only life that you do have, is that you live it to the best you can anyway? Because, you know, if this is it, it's a pretty awesome life that we've been given the opportunity to, and we're privileged in the sense of, you know, if you're watching this now, you're in part of the worlds where you're not you know, most likely not, you know, struggling for food or shelter and all the basic stuff. You know, you're watching this on a platform with internet. So yeah, it's if I think if you look at it that way, you suddenly realize that, like, from my perspective, I just don't need religion to give me that awe-inspiring feeling about looking out into the world. I get that enough through looking at the stars at night and reading about space and reading about what science is working on. That to me is the awe-inspiring feeling that I look for. So yeah, that's it. That's basically my story of how I lost my religion. Because after that, I realized that I can have my own set of morals. I think I'm a very moral abiding person. I try my very best to help people. I believe in being there for people and not using them for just selfish reasons, and being there in the bad times as well. I believe in helping people less fortunate than me, and if you do, I hope you read, you know, examine all of the evidence of whatever religion you do, and just sort of realize and make an informed decision. And if you still believe in it, then as long as it is beneficial to you and not harmful to everyone else, if that's the case, then who am I to say that that's wrong? A huge thank you to everyone who supports Geek Apocalypse. If you like what you see, please give us a subscribe, and please do check out the other videos that you find on our YouTube. We do Twitch videos on here from our Twitch channel, as well as the video podcast, and we're going to be doing some original content soon. Hopefully we're going to be doing a web series sometime in the new year, which I'm super excited to do. So a lot's going to happen on this channel in the future. So yeah, please do check out the rest of the YouTube channel. But I've been Stephen Hesse. Thank you so much for watching, and may the best man win, and if not, I'll win. Whatever that means. Thanks, guys. I'll speak to you soon.